Welcome back to the Talking Ketamine podcast. This is episode 69, Navigating K-Land.
What if treating methamphetamine addiction isn't about finding a magic cure, but about creating the mental breathing room to choose a different path?
Right.
A new qualitative study reveals that combining ketamine with therapy creates a temporary psychological space, essentially a pause button between trigger and craving. It shows that while the drug opens the window of receptivity, it's the relational safety and psychotherapy that actually lock in the change.
So, if you are listening today, our mission is to really unpack this fascinating KAPPA pilot trial.
Yeah, it's a really unique study.
It really is. It involved 14 participants who were struggling with severe methamphetamine use disorder, or MAUD, as it's known.
Right.
And we don't want to just, rattle off clinical data today. We really want to understand the lived experience of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for these specific people.
Yeah, and just to give you a quick kind of non-scientific lay of the land for how this trial was structured as a 4-week program, the participants received 3 subanesthetic doses of ketamine, and that was paired with 4 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Right. But before we even get into how the treatment works, I think we have to talk about the baseline exhaustion these folks were bringing into the room.
Oh, absolutely.
Because imagine you are stuck on a broken treadmill.
That's a good way to put it.
Right. And someone else is controlling the speed, the incline is maxed out, your muscles are just absolutely screaming, but you physically cannot step off.
And, you've been running on it for a decade.
The full decade, yeah. That was the baseline reality for the people in this study. The median duration of their regular meth use was 10 years.
10 years is a long time for the brain to be in that state.
It is. And they had tried everything. I mean, standard rehab, psychiatrists, 12-step programs.
Yeah, they had this collective frustration.
Exactly. One participant, Paul, he explicitly laid it out. He said he'd done Narcotics Anonymous, seen psychologists, and, well, nothing else worked.
And it's important to understand why nothing else worked. 10 years of chronic use fundamentally rewires the architecture of the brain. It's not just a bad habit, right? Modern neuroscience looks at this as a disorder of pathological learning.
Let's break that down a bit, because I think when people hear pathological learning, they picture someone studying a textbook the wrong way.
Right, yeah. No, so think about how we learn anything essential for survival.
Like eating.
Exactly. You eat something sweet, your brain releases dopamine, which feels good, and then another neurotransmitter, glutamate, essentially pays a memory pathway.
Saying like, remember exactly how we got this and do it again.
Exactly. But methamphetamine completely hijacks that system. It forces a dopamine release that is, frankly, astronomically higher than anything you'd get from natural rewards.
So the brain is just screaming, this is the most important survival activity we have ever experienced.
That's exactly what happens. And then the glutamate system goes into absolute overdrive, laying down this thick, rigid concrete over that behavioral pathway. So over 10 years, that pathway becomes an automatic superhighway. The brain's executive control, the part that normally says, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this, it's ruining our life, it just gets totally bypassed.
Right. The trigger happens, and the behavioral response is rigid. It's automatic.
Completely automatic.
Which is why I really want to push back on this persistent societal stigma, this deeply flawed and frankly toxic idea that addiction is just a moral failing.
Or a simple choice.
Right. Because when you read the raw transcripts from these participants, the agony is palpable. They were deeply, devastatingly aware that their meth use was unsustainable.
Yeah, they knew it was destroying their lives.
They did. But knowing you are on a broken treadmill and actually having a viable exit ramp, those are two completely different things.
And because they lacked that exit ramp, they were trapped in this exhausting loop of chronic treatment failure.
Right.
And you actually see their goals shift because of that failure. Some of them wanted absolute abstinence, like a participant named Andrew.
But many others didn't, right?
Right, like Morgan. She had reached a point of pure pragmatism. Her goal wasn't necessarily to become this paragon of sobriety.
She just wanted to reduce her use.
Exactly. Just enough so that the drug no longer controlled every waking second of her life.
Which makes me wonder, does this chronic treatment failure make patients more cynical, or does it actually make them more open to a radical approach like psychedelics?
It's an interesting question. It seems to create a unique kind of pragmatic openness. Like, what do I have to lose? It was a very common sentiment.
Because they weren't stepping into this wanting a fun trip.
No, not at all. They weren't enthusiastic psychonauts. They were desperate for something fundamentally different. But the environment of the trial itself played a massive role in bridging that trust gap.
Because this wasn't recreational.
Right. It was a highly structured, legitimized medical setting.
Well, wait, medical settings are usually the exact opposite of a safe space for people who use meth.
Oh, totally.
I mean, if you go into an ER with a history of severe methamphetamine use, you are often met with intense suspicion. Harsh lighting, security guards.
Profound judgment.
Exactly. So how did this trial overcome that?
Well, that's what the researchers call establishing relational safety.
Relational safety.
Yeah. To get these participants to try something so radical, the clinical container had to actively disconfirm their expectations of being judged.
And it actually did.
It did. The ketamine was administered via subcutaneous injection in a very quiet, monitored hospital room with nurses and doctors present.
Okay.
But it wasn't the medical equipment that made them feel safe. It was the non-judgmental warmth of the staff.
Yeah. There's a quote from Tom, one of the participants, that I thought was just incredible. He said there was never a feeling of judgment, which he noted happens constantly when you're heavily using meth.
And Jamie, another participant, he echoed that completely. He talked about how incredible and comforting it was simply having the research nurse sitting in the room with him.
Just having a presence there.
Right. When the acute drug experience got intense or disorienting, the nurse wasn't acting like a guard. She was an anchor.
You know, it's a fascinating paradox. To chemically let go of all control in your mind, you first need this extreme, rigid physical structure.
It really is ironical.
Because the physical structure of this trial was intense. They had to show up at very specific times. They had to do grounding exercises before the dose.
Vital signs continuously monitored.
Right. And you would assume that a strict schedule might feel like a huge burden to someone whose life has become completely chaotic.
But it actually functioned as the scaffolding they desperately needed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Severe addiction shatters routine. Your whole schedule is dictated entirely by the drug.
Yeah.
Getting it, using it, recovering.
So just showing up is a big deal.
Exactly. Having a set appointment at a hospital forced a level of commitment. Daniel explicitly said that discipline was good for him.
So it's almost like behavioral activation before the medicine even enters their system.
Precisely.
Preparing for the appointment, being punctual, being accountable to the nurses. It's a tangible way to get back in tune with how the rest of the world operates.
And once that unshakable safety net is in place, we get to the core intervention.
That ketamine.
Yes. They receive the dose, and they cross over into what this study colloquially calls K-land.
K-land, the acute experience. And based on the qualitative reports, it is wildly profound and really variable.
Variable.
Like, some people felt a complete separation between their mind and body. Jordan described it as this otherworldly, beautiful wonderland.
But it definitely wasn't a universal joyride.
No, not at all.
Jamie actually described his experience as hell. It was incredibly challenging.
But even the hellish experiences were framed as purposeful, weren't they?
Yes, and that is crucial to understand.
Mm.
Because of the prep work and that relational safety we talked about, the participants didn't panic when things got dark.
They leaned into it.
They did.
Ah.
Luke noted that the ketamine was opening up parts of his brain that had been shut away for a reason. Repressed trauma, guilt.
Oh.
He realized you just had to accept the bad along with the good. They understood it was part of the therapeutic unraveling.
But as fascinating as those hallucinogenic journeys are, the most critical finding of this study isn't what happened during the trip.
No.
It's what happened in the days following the dose. The researchers call it psychological space.
And this is really the crux of the entire mechanism.
Right. Let's dig into that.
So to understand this space, we have to look back at that glutamate superhighway we talked about earlier. Ketamine is an NMDA receptor antagonist.
Meaning it blocks certain receptors in the brain?
Specifically, it blocks the receptors that glutamate normally binds to.
Okay.
So if glutamate is the neurotransmitter reinforcing those rigid automatic addiction habits, ketamine temporarily puts up a roadblock on that superhighway.
It alters the brain's neuroplasticity.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it drastically dampens those hyperreactive pathways.
So the brain suddenly feels quieter?
It does. Their habitual emotional and cognitive reactivity just drops.
It's like, I think of it like a remote control. If your life is a movie playing in fast forward, right?
Yeah, I like that.
And every time a trigger hits, say, a massive fight with your family or a wave of anxiety at work, someone presses down on the fast forward button even harder.
And the automatic reaction is to reach for the drug just to cope with the speed.
Exactly. So ketamine doesn't rewrite the script of your movie. It doesn't delete the villains or magically fix the family trauma.
No, triggers are still there.
But it gives you the remote control. It lets you hit pause between feeling that trigger and reacting to it.
That pause button changes everything. Morgan talked about family issues that used to absolutely destroy her day and inevitably drive her to use meth.
And after the ketamine?
In the days following her dose, those exact same problems were still there, staring her right in the face.
Yeah.
But she was, in her own words, less bothered by them.
She had the distance to observe the trigger without being consumed by it.
Yes. Jamie reported having zero cravings in the aftermath. Even in familiar, high-risk situations, that impulsive pull in his chest was just gone.
Let's compare that to standard anti-craving medications for a second, because if you are listening to this, you might wonder why we don't just use standard pills to stop cravings.
That's a fair question.
Standard medications usually work by either blocking the euphoric effects of a drug like putting a governor on an engine, or by maintaining a steady baseline of neurotransmitters to stave off withdrawal.
Right. They're maintenance tools. They work constantly in the background to suppress the physical symptoms.
But ketamine is doing something entirely different.
Very different. It's actively disengaging the rigid reward associations. It shifts the patient from being an automatic observer-reactor to simply an observer.
It creates a targeted window of intense psychological flexibility.
Exactly.
But a pause button is temporary.
It is.
Eventually, the ketamine wears off, the movie starts playing again, and the fast-forward button is sitting right there.
Which is why ketamine alone is not a cure for addiction.
Right.
It is merely a foot in the door.
Right.
If you just give someone ketamine and send them home, those rigid neural pathways will eventually solidify right back into place.
So this is where we get to the synergy of KAP, or ketamine-assisted psychotherapy.
The vital second half of the equation.
Yeah. The participants underwent cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, in the 24 to 48 hours immediately following each ketamine dose.
And that timing is critical. When the ketamine clears your system, your brain enters a state of enhanced neuroplasticity.
Often driven by a surge in BDNF, right?
Right.
Brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Exactly. Think of BDNF as miracle grow for the brain. It makes the brain highly receptive to new environmental inputs and new learning processes.
I want to look closely at the therapy itself, though, because playing devil's advocate here, some participants noted that the CBT material they went through was quite basic.
It was very standard stuff.
Yeah, standard behavioral tools. Identifying triggers, practicing coping strategies, planning out your schedule. And many of these participants had seen this exact material before in previous failed rehab stints.
Oh, multiple times, yeah.
So if the therapy is just standard CBT, is the magic purely in the ketamine?
Well, imagine trying to plant a seed in frozen, rock-hard winter soil.
It's just going to bounce right off.
Exactly. And that is what it's like trying to do standard cognitive therapy when a patient's brain is locked in the rigid neurocircuitry of active meth addiction.
They might logically understand the concepts.
Right. They know they shouldn't hang out with their dealer, but the rigid pathways reject the behavioral change. Ketamine temporarily thaws the soil.
So even if the concepts are basic, the soil is finally soft enough to absorb the seed.
Precisely. For the first time in perhaps a decade, these participants reported absorbing the therapy rather than just passively listening to it.
Yeah, Paul said, the ketamine only gives your brain an opportunity to absorb the treatment. The treatment is the CBT.
And Luke was even more colorful about it. He said, the K will get you there, but it's a psychotherapy that really effing nails it down.
Which is such a vivid way to describe it. While the brain's concrete is temporarily wet, the human connection, the rapport with the therapist, and those tools are what physically nail down the change.
They were able to look at their triggers not as inescapable commands, but as puzzles they could actually solve.
Wow.
But, we have to be completely realistic about the outcomes of this study. It highlights exactly why this isn't a magic wand.
Right. The outcomes were highly variable. It wasn't a universal success rate of absolute sobriety.
Not at all. Some participants, like Jamie, did stop using entirely.
Which is amazing.
It is. Others achieved their harm reduction goals of significantly cutting back. But some, like Tom, had a tough reality check.
He eventually reverted to old habits, didn't he?
He did. He admitted that while he had a temporary reduction, once the 4-week trial ended and that intense clinical scaffolding was removed, the old habits came back.
Which is arguably one of the most important findings of the study. Sustained change requires ongoing effort.
It's a facilitative treatment, not a curative one.
The durability depends entirely on consolidation. You have to take that transient psychological shift and actively integrate it into your daily life.
Exactly. If a patient doesn't have ongoing support after the ketamine window closes, the old neural pathways will just freeze right back into place.
It requires motivation, therapeutic skill, and structural safety all working together.
For months, if not years.
Let's zoom out from the clinical data for a second and think about the broader implications for anyone listening.
Okay, yeah.
Because we all have automatic cue-driven loops. Obviously, for most of us, it's not severe methamphetamine addiction.
Right.
But maybe it's reaching for your phone the millisecond you feel bored, or maybe it's snapping at a partner when you feel criticized.
Or avoiding a difficult task because it triggers anxiety. We all have fast-forward buttons that get pushed.
We really do. We're all running on our own versions of that glutamate superhighway. And what this study suggests is incredibly profound. What if the future of treating our deepest psychological struggles isn't about finding a magic eraser to wipe away our triggers,
But simply finding tools to widen the gap between a stimulus and our response.
Exactly. Giving yourself the remote control. So, as we wrap up, I want you to think about this. How would your life change if you had just one extra second of psychological space before every major reaction?
It's incredibly powerful to know that even in the most severe cases of addiction, the brain can still find that breathing room.
As long as it has the safety and support to walk through the door once it's open.
The medicine thaws the soil, but human connection plants the seed.
A very hopeful path forward. Thanks for joining us for this exploration. We'll catch you on the next one.